Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Powerful Man Show. I'm your host, Tim Matthews, with my co host, Mo, the powerful woman, Pat.
Like that.
Yeah,
Let's do that for
you
now.
are. So, if you listen to the last episode, this is kind of a follow on. Mo was dropping some incredible insights that I will certainly be listening to over and over again. And she gave some great action steps as well. So what we're going to do in this episode is talk about the concept of taking responsibility, right? And what does that provide for a woman when a man takes responsibility? But more importantly, when he's not taking responsibility, what's going on there for a woman as well? Like, is she able to tell that he's not taking responsibility? I think as guys, we like to think that we can hide it really well. We can deflect the blame really intelligently. But I've got a hunch that that belief might be getting blown wide open. So anyway, responsibility. Because if you think of the last episode where we spoke about leadership and what does leadership look like in a relationship for a woman when a guy is leading, right? And the three takeaways from that were the first one was to essentially create the best version of yourself and live into that. So whatever you need to do to create the best version of yourself, be it lean into your darkness, heal, whatever, get help or support, whatever the pathway is, create the best version of yourself. Second thing was to surround yourself with other men who are on a growth journeys, right? Whose marriages are on the up instead of on the down. And the third was, what was the third, Mo? I know you mentioned activation method. Anyway, regardless what the third is, you can go back and listen to it. The point of all those three action items is taking responsibility. When you action those, right, you by default take responsibility. So let's dive into it. So let's start with the position that maybe a lot of guys are in, listening to this, and I've been in it at times. The scenario where a man isn't taking responsibility, right? As a woman, are you able to spot when he's not taking responsibility?
Yes.
That sounds like a dumb question, right? I think as guys, we can kind of kid ourselves and pretend that, well, no, she doesn't see it the way I see it. She's wrong. I'm right. Tit for tat, all that kind of stuff. But you're saying that typically you can just see through all that stuff.
Yeah. And the reason I say that is because it creates a rift. As soon as like there is no responsibility taken, you choose the path of division in your relationship. And what that means is now you both have two different realities, right? So one of you is living in one reality that something happened a certain way, and one of you is living in the other reality. And the truth behind that is maybe both of those to a certain extent are true. But the issue is you pit it against each other because you're not taking responsibility. And I'm just talking about a regular everyday fight. But yeah, I mean, and for women, I think what comes up when we start to feel like the responsibility isn't taken is typically in our heart what has happened in previous relationships or, as a kid or whatever, when we didn't see people take relationships. It's very triggering. And I think it's triggering for the same reason I said last, episode was that it creates this emotional unsafety. And what happens is we start going to worst case scenarios. So like, man, he didn't take responsibility for this. Am I crazy? Did this happen a different way? No, like I'm confident. I know that this, but it just starts to create this doubt and this division. She starts to go down this path of, fear and, we're going to be broken because he can't take responsibility. If he can never take responsibility, then we can't grow. We can't be better.
And do you mean like taking responsibility? Is this regardless of whether it's something big or small? So let's say it is, hey, he said he was going to take out the trash and he didn't, and he's not taking responsibility because he's blaming it on the fact maybe he was too busy or whatever, versus just saying, you know what, you're right. I promised to do that. I didn't do it. I'm going to go do it now. Is it the same thing for that as it is for something more triggering or a bigger instance that may create a bigger fight?
So I don't know if you ever play with a Hot Wheels track, but on Hot Wheels tracks, there are the big boosters that like get the car in motion. And then there are the little like things that help it along the way. And I'd say there's a difference in impact when you have the big things that lose like that where they're not taking responsibility, and then the little moments like the trash and the little things. And so, but whatever it is, it's still creating momentum in the same direction. And I guess I say that because when a man doesn't take responsibility, he's typically becoming the victim. And what happens as a victim is you don't just stay in victim, and a woman feels you taking on the victim role, and then she gets pissed because you're not taking responsibility for what you did. Whether she is or not, this is just what happens in my mind as a woman, and maybe for a lot of other women. And I think as a victim, you, like I said, you don't stay there. You start to move to persecutor because you start justifying your story. So, you're not taking responsibility. So you're becoming the victim, for me. And then you take on persecutor to justify your story, to justify the lie that you're giving to yourself. And so that creates even more division, which creates a different sort of lack of trust, which creates, dishonesty. And like I said, the little pieces of dishonesty or the little moments where you're not taking ownership can obviously build up to creating these opposing realities where the guy really enters that deer mode, and which, as we know, doesn't help women develop trust or safety or any of the things that she needs to feel like there's intimacy in the relationship.
Yeah, you raise a great point, because we often talk, when obviously you're an advisor and you speak with the men, you advise them on what path to take in bringing a marriage back from the brink of divorce, quite honestly. And we often share the idea of meeting their emotional needs, right? And a woman doesn't want to have to tell you what to do to meet her needs emotionally. I think this is a real clear example of one of the ways that a man can meet the emotional needs of a woman, right? By taking the responsibility.
Yeah.
And she doesn't want to have to tell him to take it. She doesn't want to have to convince him to take it. And if she sees him, like you say, go into deer mode, instead of meeting her needs emotionally, I imagine that takes from her needs emotionally and actually has the opposite effect.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what ends up happening is when you don't take responsibility and you become that persecutor, you start to point the finger at your spouse, and which is really just a cover up for not wanting to, I guess, so no one will notice the shame that you really feel. That's easy to do for anyone, any gender.
To not notice the shame that you really feel. Yeah. I think that's a big one for men. Shame. I think it's huge, especially in a relationship, because the men that we speak with, as these guys are business owners, business leaders, and they are used to being able to be in control. They go into work, they call the shots. People look at them as though they've got the answers. They're used to getting a lot of their needs met: needs for significance, needs for certainty, needs for uncertainty, because there's growth, right? Contribution, all sorts. So when they then come home and they are being challenged, which sometimes not necessarily used to, they're being challenged by the woman they love, they can start to feel shame. They can start to feel insecurity. They can start to feel inadequacy, which then leads to dear, defend, excuse, explain, react, which then makes a woman even more angry. And maybe she wasn't even challenging him in the first place. Maybe he just had a bad day and he's on edge. And maybe she's just come at him with a little bit more intensity than usual, but she's not trying to fight with him in any way, but he takes it that way, right? Either way, if you don't then take responsibility, and because of the shame, then I think this is true of a lot of the guys that enter into a relationship, end up in a relationship where there's a lack of intimacy. I think, again, painting that picture of on one side being this leader in business, but on the other side, almost being a stranger in your own home, and the intimacy starts to go. I think for a lot of guys, they can stop also initiating the intimacy because they're afraid of the rejection, and it's the shame that comes with the rejection. And it's just the shame cycle. And when the guys, we've spoken about this before, the shame cycle, when they then feel the shame, they want to sedate themselves. So they'll sedate themselves, whether it's through food or alcohol or drugs or porn or work or whatever. And then they then feel bad, and then they sabotage themselves even more, which creates more shame, and then just creates this constant cycle of shame, sabotage, and sedation. And it's not good. It's I just wonder about. So let's take it a step further and paint the other side here of a guy taking responsibility. Let's say that he's able to not absorb the shame that he might be feeling in the moment. He's able to resist it and instead take responsibility, face shortcomings. What does that do for you as a woman in the relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's key there is that has to be consistent. Again, not perfect, but creating a consistency and taking responsibility, just as the same as, the Hot Wheels track of when you're not taking responsibility, it goes in one direction. It's the same thing as when you take responsibility, you're going in that direction, you start to build momentum there. But I think what I feel when, my husband takes responsibility is there's a freeness, like the air is like bigger in the room, like there's just, I'm not hurt. I want to I'm safe, open. It's attractive. I mean, that's a huge piece of attraction for a woman. A man who's willing to, apologize, but also a man who's willing to own up when he does screw up. It just, it creates that safety. And so, a lot of that is how, hurt dissipates when they start to take responsibility. I mean, think about like a 10-year relationship where a guy is constantly not taking responsibility. And then one day he decides, like, I'm going to do this. How much release out of that tank in her that's been holding so much bitterness and stress and hurt, and, how much of that is released in a moment of seeing him really own up to what he has done to hurt the relationship. I mean, it's an incredible amount of everything that just is released from you.
Wow. So you don't, I know for myself in the past, the reasons why I haven't taken responsibility is the shame, but also then I don't want to feel like a failure. I don't want to look weak. I don't want to, if I admit where I've gone wrong, then I admit being weak essentially. And then will she leave me, or will she still want to be with me? Right. If I'm this kind of guy that has messed up, surely that doesn't provide or protect her. But what you're saying is a complete opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's funny with that mindset, you'll just create more distance, like it's just going to create more hurt to withdraw. That feeling of inadequacy pulls you away. It's not an emotion that pulls you towards. But if you choose to move towards, then there's a pattern interrupt, and that's noticed by her. You're choosing to disclose your insecurity, to disclose your hurt, to disclose the ways you have been a failure, and she feels like that's relatable because we're humans and we want to know that everyone else is saying, you screwed up. Yeah, me too. And that creates intimacy because, you're not the only failure in the room. Intimacy for him and her. And that's what like the partnership in marriage is. It's walking into the depths with each other, and so that you can walk, on the mountains with each other.
Oh, I love that. Wow. Walk into the depths so you can walk into the mountains. And obviously you're familiar with the clean slate method that we give the guys in the activation method. The reason why we give them it is because of this. It gives them a framework to be able to take responsibility in a way that's authentic. It's got to be authentic. They've got to want to take the responsibility. They've got to see their side in it, right? But assuming they've done that through the Live as a King system, the other tools in there, they arrive at the point they've been ready to deliver the clean slate letter, because it's how the clean slate method goes. I'm curious, knowing what you know about the clean slate method, can you see why it would have the effect that it does when it's
at that
delivered?
point? Yes. I think there's this misconception that a lot of guys want to develop and push out a clean slate letter before they become a different version of themselves and before they're meeting her needs. And that's backwards. She doesn't want to hear an apology, because then you're apologizing for a guy that you continue to plan on being if you haven't made those changes.
Wow.
But if you're apologizing out of a space of leadership and, you've been meeting her needs, not that the clean slate letter is just an apology, but if you're doing that out of a new space, you're saying, yeah, I'm sorry for the guy that I no longer plan on being. And that's what creates the safety and intimacy in a clean slate letter. It's choosing to do the work, choosing to, commit to yourself and being better and showing up.
I love that. Yeah, it really is. I mean, we've seen some, and I don't mean to plug the clean slate letter, but we've seen some incredible results. Well, it's like anything, right? Just for the listeners, if you imagine a triangle, it's kind of like the activation method. At the base, you'd have the lives of the king system, on the left hand side, hidden motives, right hand side, clean slate. So none of them work without one another, right? If you don't have the foundation, the sides won't have anything to sit on. If you don't have one side, this side won't stand, right? So I can't just say that the results we've seen are down to the clean slate letter. I think it's a combination, like you said a moment ago, in the order. But yeah, the ability for some of these guys to either pull the marriage back from the brink of divorce, we've seen that many times, or even guys rekindle a relationship that has gone kind of sexless and passionless. And I've really enjoyed our conversations over the past couple of episodes because I love the perspective from a woman's angle, right? Because we have understandings of how this works, but at the same time, to hear it from a woman's perspective is just incredible. So anyway, Mo, thank you for being here. I really appreciate your time. I know you can't say your goodbyes because I think your internet's dropped, so you're not on the screen, but it's all good. So guys, as always, the moment of insight, take massive action. And as always, if you have any questions on this episode, head over to the Facebook group, post a question in there. Mo is in there. She can answer these. She can have conversations with you guys. And again, thank you for being here, guys, and have a terrific day.